Stonewall is one of the leading LGBTQ lobby groups in this country, and we're all familiar, I'm sure, with their campaigns, their political activism, and the fact that they have very strong links to government and other leading institutions in this country. And I'm sure I'll return to them in the future with other videos about aspects of their activism. But today I just want to concentrate on one area. Stonewall on their website make the following claim: Stonewall receives no core government funding, and funds are instead raised in a variety of ways, including donations, sponsorship and fundraising events. Now, most people would read that and think, oh, Stonewall don't receive any government funding. They're not funded by the taxpayer. They're just reliant on private donations and fundraising. But if we look at their accounts, which are lodged with the Charity Commission and which are available for members of the public to see online, we see a rather different story. So this is taken from their financial statement submitted to the Charity Commission. And this is income from charitable activities grants. So these are grants that Stonewall has received from various organisations. And there you will see listed the Department for Education, £254,243. The Foreign and Commonwealth Office, £94,094. The Scottish Government, £100,000. The Welsh Government, £119,982. So in all, there's over £500,000 that Stonewall received last year from government. In other words, over £500,000 of taxpayers' money has been given to Stonewall for their activities. Now, it's one of those particular items, the money coming from the Department of Education, which I want to just focus on in this video and look at what Stonewall is doing in what they describe as their educational work they do in schools, also in further and higher education, but an awful lot of it is happening in secondary and primary schools. Here's a list of educational resources that are available for secondary schools. These are aimed at secondary schools. They've got other pages that are aimed at primary schools, higher education and further education, as you can see. And at the bottom there you see the Getting Started Toolkit, which says this toolkit sets out 5 key steps for preventing and tackling homophobic, biphobic, transphobic bullying in secondary schools. Now, bullying, anti-bullying, is the shield behind which Stonewall hides its campaigns. And they always, in their literature, present themselves as wanting to give propaganda, in effect, to school children, simply to prevent what they call homophobic bullying. Again, that's somewhat disingenuous. And when we actually look at how they define bullying, we'll start to see a number of problems. Now, of course, we all want to stop bullying in schools. I mean, and schools have, for very, very many years, or ever since there have been schools, have been aware of the problem of bullying, and people are bullied for all sorts of reasons. Okay, so here's a page from their secondary school toolkit. There's a section of homophobic bullying. And they give examples. So if we look down there at the 4th example, a girl who reports that since she came out as a lesbian, other girls in her class keep moving away from her and giggling every time they're in the changing rooms. Okay, that is what Stonewall define as being homophobic bullying. But let's just unpack this a little bit. Okay, let's see what's happening here. Okay, the girls are moving away from her and giggling every time they're in the changing rooms. Okay, so these they know that this girl is a lesbian. She is sexually attracted to other girls, and they're keeping their distance from her in the changing rooms. They're not calling her nasty names. They're not doing anything to her. They're simply keeping their distance. Now, why would that be? Well, let's just think about changing rooms in schools. We don't have mixed changing rooms. We have separate changing rooms for boys and girls. And the reason is very clear, and particularly at secondary school level. Would girls want to be changing when there are a load of boys there who can see them as they get changed. You know, so they're naked or semi-naked. It could be in the showers, it could be just changing. Would girls want boys there watching them? Even if they didn't do anything or say anything, would they want them there? No, of course they wouldn't. And that's why we have separate changing rooms, because the boys are sexually attracted to girls, and the girls know this and do not want the boys staring at them. Well, the same thing goes for a lesbian. A lesbian is sexually attracted to girls, just as boys are attracted to girls. And they're aware of this, and they're very awkward, and they feel very uncomfortable. So there's no bullying going on by the girls here. The girls are actually behaving in a cautious and defensive way. They're defending their modesty, you could call it, and the giggling is, well, it could be nervousness. People do laugh nervously when they're in a situation where they're feeling profoundly uncomfortable. But the bullying isn't going on by the girls towards the lesbian in this particular case. If anything, the lesbian who is out about her homosexuality and who presumably insists on changing with the girls to whom, some of whom maybe she is sexually attracted, is the one that is causing a great deal of discomfort. But this is treated by Stonewall as bullying. They're inventing bullying that doesn't exist to create a sense of crisis, to justify their own existence to some extent. But there are other items in the educational resources section for schools, and there's a pack of posters here, Trans Visibility Day posters. Trans Visibility Day is this is what Stonewall says: taking place every year on the 31st of March, Trans Day of Visibility celebrates the achievements of trans people across the globe while recognising the work still required to make transphobia a thing of the past. To you and me, ordinary people, what we would call this is trying to normalise transgenderism and trying to normalise it to children. And there's a number of people there, trans people, people who've changed from, transitioned from man to woman, woman to man, and some who haven't even decided what they are and want to be referred to as they. Most of these people you've probably never heard of, but you'll have heard of this person, Munro Bergdorf. He, because he is genetically a man, but has transitioned to female, has had the surgery, and calls himself a trans woman. But he's been in the news recently for making overtly racist comments about white people. Munro Bergdorf is a model, and he was hired by the fashion house L'Oreal to be the face of L'Oreal for their cosmetic range. But within a few days of being hired, he was sacked by them for making racist remarks. And here's what he actually said on his Facebook page. Honestly, I don't have energy to talk about the racial violence of white people anymore. Yes, all white people. Because most of you all don't even realise or refuse to acknowledge that your existence, privilege and success as a race is built on the backs, blood and death of people of colour. Your entire existence is drenched in racism. From microaggressions to terrorism, you guys built the blueprint for this shit. Come see me when you realise that racism isn't learnt. It's inherited and consciously or unconsciously passed down through privilege. Once white people begin to admit that their race is the most violent and oppressive force of nature on earth, then we can talk. Until then, stay acting shocked about how the world continues to stay fucked at the hands of your ancestors and your heads that remain buried in the sand, with hands over your ears. So let's be quite clear what Bergdorf is saying here. He's saying that all white people are implicated in racist violence. And furthermore, all white people benefit from racism. And after he'd been sacked by L'Oreal, he appeared on a number of television programs.
And do you mean all white people? Because that's what has wound some people up and offended
Basically,
some.
I'm speaking about socialisation. So I'm speaking about how society conditions us to believe certain things. So to a certain extent, we're socialised to believe that men are dominant, women are submissive. We live in a homophobic society that has only recently started to change. There's all of these things that aren't necessarily what we should believe, but they are in society.
But do you believe all white people...
I believe that there's a structure.
Sorry, I was just going to finish the sentence. Do you believe that all white people have taken part in racial violence, which is what you wrote?
I believe that society is built on the foundation. It's not what I believe, it's a fact that society is built on the foundations of colonialism and slavery.
I understand that. In terms of specifically what you wrote,
yeah.
Are you standing by all white people and racial violence?
I'm
all white
standing
people
by,
are guilty of racial
violence. That's a very nuanced thing. So you have things like microaggressions that people of colour will experience every single day, that everything from moving from a black person on a bus to...
I understand that, but are you saying all white people are guilty of that?
I'm not saying all white people are guilty of it, but all white people benefit from racism.
So this is classic cultural Marxist identity politics stuff. You know, first you identify a victim class who can do no wrong, in this case black people. You identify an oppressor class who can do no right, white people. And he denies the possibility of individual agency and instead sort of blames the system in sort of nebulous terms such as socialisation, which means that he can give himself an automatic defence when people get offended and say, well, I wasn't attacking you personally, but he gets to say those offensive things anyway. And in fact, when he was called out about this business of violence, he fell back on trying to redefine what violence means. So we had this nonsense about microaggressions. And we had the example which he gave of people moving away from a black person on a bus. No one could, in their right mind, say that people moving away from a black person on a bus was an example of violence. It might be other things, but it's certainly not violence. Now, what's this got to do with Stonewall? Well, obviously Stonewall work with Munro Bergdorf, but here is someone who is a racist, an anti-white racist, one might even say a race baiter, and Stonewall are working with this person. Stonewall are promoting this person to children as a role model, as someone to emulate, someone who makes racist and offensive comments about all white people. And they do stand by Bergdorf, because here is a tweet that they issued the day that Munro Bergdorf was sacked. There we are, Stonewall supports Munro Bergdorf. So this is the statement that Stonewall issued. This was Stonewall CEO Ruth Hunt. And basically she's supporting Munro Bergdorf 100%. And that includes her racist comments at white people. So you've got to ask yourself, is this the kind of organisation that should be receiving over £500,000 of taxpayers' money? The Department of Education has given money to Stonewall, and Stonewall is, I'm guessing, using that money, some of that money, to fund these posters, which are for putting up in schools. And one of the people on the posters has made these racist remarks. And Stonewall has said that's perfectly okay. We think what Bergdorf did was perfectly acceptable. Well, that's it for today. I hope you've been interested in what I've been saying and what you've seen. If you like what you've heard, subscribe. Feel free to leave a comment. I will get criticism, no doubt, for this, but that's part of free speech and open debate, which I'm all in favour of. And I hope to see you next time. Bye-bye now.